The driver looked ahead into the pitch black. Suddenly, instead of the clear lines of the railroad bridge, he saw an abyss. The operator immediately hit the emergency brake, hoping to stop the train. But the inertia of the multi-ton machine was unstoppable. The 1953 New Zealand railway tragedy was the worst of the 20th century and also the most unexpected because one of its causes was a volcano. So how exactly did it cause the deaths of 151 people? And what exactly caused other major railroad disasters? One thing before we begin. Viewer discretion is advised. December 24th, 1953. The train station in Wanganui, New Zealand, on a festive Christmas Eve. Passengers gathered on the platform waiting to board the night express train to Wellington. Many were in a hurry to celebrate Christmas with their families, while others were returning home after a long week at work. The train, KA 949 on the platform, consisted of 11 cars, first and second class passenger cars, a mail car, and a security car. In the cab of the locomotive, experienced driver Charles Parker, after checking all the systems, prepared for departure, and the train, with 285 people, departed on schedule at 3 p.m., accelerating to 80 kilometers per hour. This was very fast by the standards at the time. It had to travel more than 200 kilometers through the picturesque landscapes of the North Island to reach its final stop at 3 p.m. the next day. Although the terrain included volcanic areas, there was no sign of danger. So passengers relaxed and leaned against the windows, watching the scenery. 18-year-old Ted Brett and his 12-year-old brother John Douglas were supposed to be in first class, but a mix-up put them in second. The same happened to 15-year-old John Mahi and his 17-year-old sister. However, unlike the others, at one of the stops, they managed to take the comfortable first-class seats assigned to them at the end of the train. The fact that the brother and sister insisted on their rightful seats would later save their lives. They were not the only teenagers traveling alone on the train that day. Joan Karum and her sister, Madeline, were also in second class. In the car, they met a woman named Anne. Anne struck up a girlish conversation. Everyone was talking about a remarkable event for New Zealand. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip had visited as part of their Commonwealth Realms tour. During these conversations, the passengers didn't even notice that something had gone wrong outside the train, except for the driver. As Charles Parker approached the bridge over the Wanganui River in Tangiwai, he saw a passerby standing on the tracks waving a flashlight as if to warn him of something. It was Cyril Ellis, and at that moment, only he knew that all those people were about to perish because of a volcano. One of New Zealand's most active volcanoes, Ruapehu, was near the railroad track on which the express was traveling. It wasn't erupting that night, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. In fact, its crater lake is filled with hot water. On that day, the natural dam holding back this water suddenly burst. As a result, an enormous amount of boiling water, about 18 billion liters, was released, forming a powerful mudflow known as a lahar. It roared down the slopes of Ruapehu with incredible speed, carrying with it volcanic ash, rock debris, and trees. The impact of the mudflow damaged the bridge pylons that the train was approaching, so Cyril waved his flashlight, not only to warn, but to somehow illuminate the broken rails for the driver in pitch darkness. Charles Parker saw it at the last moment and immediately slammed on the brakes. Still, it was too late. John Mahi and his sister felt the train sway slightly to the side, and then it stopped. The conductor told them there had been an accident and they should wait. The children looked out the window, where a flashing spotlight illuminated the river, and John was horrified to see cars and people screaming and drowning in the water. The passengers ran to the windows. They were shocked by what they saw. As it turned out, the 5 cars at the very end of the train, namely the first class, the security, and the mail, were lucky enough to stay on the bridge. The locomotive and the other 5 cars fell into the water, and the 6th car teetered on the edge of the broken tracks. That's why the passengers in the last cars didn't even realize anything had gone wrong. Unfortunately, Ted, who remained in the 2nd car, couldn't escape this hell. At the moment of the accident, he felt the train shaking and tipping over, so he immediately rushed to wake his brother. But before they could do anything, the car had already plunged into the icy water. Ted broke the window and got out while the car was actually falling apart and sinking. He was good at climbing, so he quickly made his way through the wreckage and then swam through the strong currents to shore. Later he would say, "I didn't even know the damn river's name. I didn't know where I was." almost didn't know who I was. In the sinking third car, Joan Karam grabbed the luggage rack to keep from going under. At first, she thought the train had drifted out to sea until she realized the water was not salty. Joan screamed and called for her sister Madeline, but no one answered. The girl felt someone's hand under the water. She grabbed it tightly and pulled it up. And then Anne emerged from the water. The girls were covered with objects from the car and dead bodies floating chaotically in the water. It was a very creepy picture. Joan swam up through the broken window and helped Anne out. They sat on the car's walls and began to look around. The girls saw many lanterns on the shore and realized there was a chance, however slim, that they might be rescued if they didn't succumb to hypothermia before they reached them. Army units, medics, police, volunteers, and bulldozers gathered at the scene and worked. The darkness and silt made the work much more difficult, but the river began to subside, revealing the bodies and wreckage. The next day, Ted returned to the crash site in search of his loved ones. The air was filled with the pungent smell of sulfur carried by the river from the volcano, and in the light of day, he saw a horrific picture of a major disaster. Huge boulders, an 80-ton concrete bridge pier torn out of the ground, the wreckage of railroad cars, people dead and on the verge of death. One woman, up to her neck in mud, was begging for a quick death when rescuers found her. Many of them received medals for bravery from the Queen, Cyril Ellis among them as well. Thanks to him waving a torch and warning the driver that the bridge was about to collapse, 104 people in the rear cars survived. Unfortunately, 151 people lost their lives. Among them were Ted's friends and Joan's sister. The board's investigation found that the tragedy was caused by a natural phenomenon that the railroad's infrastructure couldn't withstand. But was that the only reason? The investigation revealed that the design of the bridge didn't consider the possibility of such a powerful natural disaster, although perhaps it should have. After the tragedy, the bridge was indeed improved. It was raised another 2 meters, and an advanced early warning system was installed. It includes a radar that measures the river level and automatically notifies dispatchers if the water level rises dangerously. If a threat is detected, hazard signals block train traffic across the bridge. But is this system an absolute guarantee of safety? September 22nd, 1993, Alabama, USA. At 2 a.m., Amtrak Sunset Limited's passenger train began its next journey, connecting Los Angeles and Miami. The train had 3 locomotives and 7 cars, carrying 220 people, including 11-year-old Andrea Chansey, a girl with cerebral palsy who used a wheelchair. In the same car with her were her foster parents and businessman, Ken Ivory. The train had to cross a narrow railroad bridge over the Big Bayou Canot River. But as it approached, at 2:45 a.m., a tugboat pulling barges across the same river suddenly found itself in a place not intended for navigation. This happened because of a navigational error. One of the barges crashed into the central support of the bridge so hard that its spans were shifted by about 1 meter. The safety sensors I told you about, the only thing that could have prevented the tragedy, also failed. That's why the traffic light that controlled the train traffic was green. The train driver, who was traveling at 116 kilometers per hour, had no reason to suspect danger. He simply would not have had time to react. So, when the first locomotive reached the damaged bridge, the rails came down under it, and the spans collapsed. The train and all the cars fell into the water. The driver passed away instantly, even before he could hit the emergency brakes. After the crash, the passengers found themselves in darkness, panic, and chaos. The broken cars quickly filled with water. Little Andrea had the hardest time. She quickly found herself underwater and couldn't save herself. Suddenly, someone pushed her up, and she managed to get some air into her lungs. Most likely, it was one of her foster parents who unfortunately drowned. Yet, at the last moment before their end, pushed the girl out of the flooded part of the car. Ivory picked her up and dragged her outside. In addition to the girl's parents, 47 people perished in the tragedy, while 103 people were injured but survived. It's clear that the main cause was the error of the tugboat captain. But if the warning system had been more reliable, the largest rail disaster in Alabama history could have been prevented. It would seem that we should have learned from the mistakes of other engineers long ago and reconsidered the reliability of all bridges over which railroad tracks are laid. But in the 21st century, such tragic incidents haven't yet come to an end. June 22nd, 2001, India. The passenger train was traveling from the city of Mangalore to Chennai. A man named Girish was also traveling in it. He had the upper seat, yet due to a knee injury, he asked a stranger sitting on the lower shelf to switch seats with him, which later saved his life. The train was crossing an old bridge over the Kudalandi River, which was over 140 years old. Suddenly, one of its supports failed, and the train cars went off the tracks, 3 of which fell into the water. During the accident, the roof of the train broke so badly that the stranger with whom Girish had exchanged seats couldn't be saved. Since then, Girish has suffered from guilt and believes that he is to blame for his death. Besides him, 300 people survived, and 59 lost their lives. Investigations revealed that the bridge had been weakened by the heavy rains that had hit India the day before. However, such problems with bridges were ignored in the days when such structures were just being developed. In 1871, construction began on the bridge over the River Tay in Scotland, designed by engineer Thomas Bouch. It was an ambitious project that would become the pride of Great Britain. According to Bouch's plan, the bridge would be elegant and modern, combining cast iron columns with steel supports that promised reliability and durability. Non-standard engineering solutions were required to ensure the passage of ships under the bridge. The design appeared to be an innovative response to technical challenges, though the design didn't take into account climate conditions, including high winds. On December 28, 1879, a severe storm swept through Great Britain. It was rated as the maximum 12 points on the Beaufort scale. The wind was blowing almost at right angles to the Tay Bridge. At that moment, a passenger train was crossing it from Burtonsland to Dundee, carrying about 75 people. The terrible whistling of the wind and the shaking of the carriages frightened the passengers. Conductors walked between the rows, reassuring people that everything was under control. However, the wind had already reached speeds of more than 130 kilometers per hour, shaking the bridge to its maximum. To reduce the panic, the driver slowed the train down a bit, but he realized that too much speed could lead to disaster, and too slow speed would make the train more vulnerable to wind gusts. As the train reached the center of the bridge, a strong blast tore down one of its longest spans, measuring 74 meters long. In an instant, it collapsed into the river along with the cars. A terrible roar resounded in the darkness. And then, everything was the same as in the previous stories. Screams, chaos, icy water, flooded cars, death, many deaths. The bodies of numerous passengers remained trapped in the sunken cars, and those who swam out couldn't be rescued because of the intense storm. According to official reports, no one survived. The Tay Bridge disaster became one of the biggest rail disasters in British history. An investigation found that the main cause of the tragedy was a series of miscalculations by Bouch in the choice of materials and design solutions. The bridge's columns weren't anchored securely enough, reducing the structure's ability to withstand vibrations and loads. The cast iron used to make the supporting elements lacked the necessary strength and was prone to cracking. The chief engineer defended himself by claiming that many decisions were made under pressure from the railroad to cut costs and speed construction. In 1880, 2 years after the disaster, he passed away. There's a reason that the last thing I talked about was the very first major disaster on a railroad bridge. Interestingly, safety standards were adjusted after that tragedy, as they were in every story I've mentioned. Yet incidents like these, unfortunately, still happen. What do you think is the safest way to travel? Let me know in the comments. I've always thought it was the train, but I'm unsure now. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. There are plenty more videos that could save your life. For example, whether flying somewhere by plane is as safe as you think.